Hello, I'm Christian Fraser. This is The Context.
I resigned from Cabinet today because I said I would if there was any adverse finding from this inquiry, and I'm true to my word, politicians should be. But I do think it sets a very dangerous precedent.
Well, the big question for the Prime Minister is why he was so weak to appoint him in the first place. The second question for the Prime Minister is why he didn't sack him.
Dominic Raab always set the highest of standards when he was Justice Secretary, demanding that his department work really hard on people's priorities. And he also set the highest standards in terms of the threshold for his resignation.
Welcome to the programme. 60 interviews, 2.5 days of cross-examination and a 48-page report that documents Dominic Raab's misuse of power. We will dig deep tonight into the Deputy Prime Minister's response to those allegations and the political fallout from his resignation. Also tonight, stagnation, fifth season syndrome and staying afloat in the Premier League. Why does survival feel like an end in itself for so many of England's richest clubs? No stagnation at Wrexham, not anymore. Ryan Reynolds' fairy tale could reach its climax tomorrow. The world's third oldest professional club on the brink of the non-league championship and a return to the Football League. And the changing global economy. Are we splitting into two competing blocks? And what does that mean for trade, currency and politics? Our panel joining us to discuss that after 9 o'clock this evening. But let's start with Dominic Raab's resignation. The report from Adam Tolley KC concluded the Deputy Prime Minister's conduct had amounted to a misuse of power in a way that undermined or humiliated the staff who worked for him. And he must have been aware of this effect, said Tolley, because he'd been warned about his behaviour on 3 separate occasions by 2 permanent secretaries. Though Mr Raab, who was interviewed 4 times, denied those conversations took place. Let's join Jonathan Blake, who is at Westminster for us this evening. Jonathan, we've got 3 highly relevant panellists who are going to talk to us very shortly about this, but we've tried to contact Conservative MPs today and there seems to be some sort of a murder in place. What's going on? Jonathan, thank you very much. Joining me to discuss is Henry Hill from Conservative Home, Dave Penman, who is the General Secretary of the FDA Union, which represents workers in the civil service, and Sir Bob Kerslake, former head of the Home Civil Service. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us. Dave Penman, could I start with you and the central allegation that he makes against the union, possibly you? He says he was warned by Britain's most senior civil servant that he was being targeted by unionised officials who were plotting a Kafkaesque attempt to force him from office. Your response to that?
The final problem is that if you define it by how people feel about it, rather than having an objective standard of behaviour, that suddenly becomes very difficult to police, because suddenly something which people Dominic has worked with in the past accepted, suddenly someone's upset by it and he's a bully. OK, we will have to leave it there, gentlemen. We're going to a break. Henry Hill, Sir Bob Kerslake, Dave Penman, thank you very much indeed for your time. Do stay with us. After the break, we're going to talk football. It is Friday after all.
Are you a raver?
Do I look like a raver?
I've got bass in a backpack. This is amazing.
Dancing for like 4 or 5 hours of a gig, you could generate about 800 kilowatt hours of thermal energy. So that's a lot of energy.
Right, so shall we give it a taste then? It's my favourite.
We're really talking to the plants and they're telling us how happy they are.
It can fly, but it can also float on water.
The bots kick off with some swift striking.
Oh my God, that came by quick.
It's all about augmented reality.
Useful then, it's useful.
I scroll through the options with my finger here. Solar system, let's give that one a go. Totally and utterly immersed in another world there.
We've got to consider all of these things if we're going to avoid an apocalyptic fate.
But also excited.
The police have found us. I can't believe I'm now wanting to run away from the police. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Your Tech Update. Click. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
Hello, I'm Christian Fraser. You're watching The Context on BBC News. The Dragons are alive and on the up. Non-league Wrexham on the brink of promotion back to the Football League, a 15-year journey that almost led them to ruin. But we're going to start this half hour with some breaking news. Britain's biggest lobbying group, the CBI, has said in the last hour that it has suspended key activities until June after a number of major firms quit the organisation. It comes after further allegations of sexual harassment and abuse. The CBI said these latest allegations were abhorrent and that it had previously been unaware of the claims. We can speak to Laurie Laird, the International Communications and Financial World Affairs commentator. She's in West London for us this evening. Good to see you. It's a rather strange statement, this. We're suspending key activities. I suppose you have to understand what the CBI does to make sense of that. Maybe you could explain it to us. Really interesting. Laurie Laird, good to see you. Thanks very much for coming on.
Pleasure.
A few years ago, Wrexham Association Football Club was not a team many football fans would have heard of. They were just another local club playing in the fifth tier of English football, strapped for cash, owned by a group of loyal fans. But then Hollywood came to town. The big-time actors Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney bought the club and since then have pumped millions into the squad, the stadium, the community, all part of a highly successful TV series that was streamed on Disney+. It's working. Wrexham are now on the brink of promotion. A win tomorrow against Boreham Wood will seal the title and a return to League Two 15 years after they were relegated. Local heroes, but thanks to the documentary, a club now with an outsized international reputation. Joining me is Andy Gilpin. He's a lifelong Wrexham fan who runs Fearless in Devotion. It's a Wrexham fanzine and podcast. Thanks for coming on the programme. I was just thinking, if you were writing the movie script, you would have finished it with last week's game against second place Notts County. A last-minute penalty save, the title all but secured. Is tomorrow something of an anticlimax? One of the great old names of English football. Andy, will you stay with us? Because I want to get your thoughts on a story we're going to cover next. It would be, of course, the dream for every Wrexham fan, as it is for every club in the country, to play in the Premier League. But with hundreds of millions of pounds spent by the biggest clubs each year, staying up is always the first hurdle. And if you take a look at the current table, you'll see just how precarious the position is for probably 6 or 7 clubs who are still fighting relegation. Among them, Leicester City, who miraculously won the league back in 2016 and are now in the bottom 3. Everton, who've been in the top flight since 1954, perilously close to the drop again. Nottingham Forest, who've only just been promoted, have spent over £140 million on players. No guaranteed survival. So what does it take to stay up, and what does the table tell us about the health of football's richest league? Oliver Kay is the senior writer with The Athletic. He's just written a fascinating piece on this. Oliver, good to see you. You've spotted a trend and you call it the 5-year syndrome. What happens after 5 years? Yeah, dream big. That is Hollywood. Andy Gilpin, thank you very much. Oliver Kay, thanks so much for coming on. It's a fascinating article. It's in The Athletic. Have a read of it. It'll tell you an awful lot about the way the richest league is run. This is BBC News. Let's take a quick look at some of the other stories making headlines today. The United Nations has warned that saving the world's glaciers is in effect a lost cause. In its annual report on climate change, the World Meteorological Organization found that glaciers melted at an alarming speed last year, describing their loss in Europe as off the charts. The report said the effects were obvious, from extensive flooding in Pakistan to extreme heat waves across Europe and China and catastrophic drought in Somalia. Leaders of the UK's biggest union for the communications industry, the Communication Workers Union, have accepted a Royal Mail pay offer, which includes a 10% salary increase and a one-off lump sum of £500. Union members will vote on the deal in the coming weeks, which could bring an end to the dispute over jobs and conditions, which led to a series of walkouts last year. And a picture of the late Queen surrounded by some of her grandchildren and great-grandchildren at Balmoral Castle has been released on what would have been her 97th birthday. The picture was taken several months before she passed away in September of last year. You are live with BBC News. Europe is facing a massive cocaine crisis, according to the law enforcement agencies. Production of the drug has increased by a third in just 1 year after a slowdown during the pandemic. Europe and North America are the largest markets for cocaine. In the most recent discovery, British authorities seized more than a ton of the drug that was found floating off the south coast. Smugglers are even using submarines to bring in millions of dollars worth of cocaine from South America. Our Europe correspondent Nick Beake has been investigating. Thanks to Nick for that. Plenty more on that on the BBC website if you want to take a look. We'll be here for another hour, of course. We're watching very closely tonight a decision that's pending at the US Supreme Court. They have to determine whether that widely used abortion drug, mifepristone, can stay on the shelves. It is the most common method of ending a pregnancy in the US. Accounts for more than half of the abortions in the country, so it's a seismic decision that the Supreme Court is taking. In fact, probably the biggest decision they've taken since they overturned Roe v. Wade. We've got Lenny Chen and Rebecca Harding coming up, our panellists this evening, two trade experts. So we're going to get into an issue that we've discussed on the programme before, deep dive into whether the world is actually splitting into two trading blocks, and what does that mean for currency, for politics, and for policy. Big implications for that, and of course a lot of that stemming out of the war in Ukraine. All that coming up in the second hour of the programme. We'll go to a short break. We'll see you then.
Lift everything.
Behind every headline, there is a human story. This is Our World.
The living culture.
A series of documentary films that reveal the human drama at the heart of global events.
Життя триває, у нас двоє дітей.
Our World. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
Hello, I'm Christian Fraser. This is The Context.
I resigned from Cabinet today because I said I would if there was any adverse finding from this inquiry, and I'm true to my word. Politicians should be. But I do think it sets a very dangerous precedent.
Well, the big question for the Prime Minister is why he was so weak to appoint him in the first place. The second question for the Prime Minister is why he didn't sack him.
Dominic Raab always set the highest of standards when he was Justice Secretary, demanding that his department work really hard on people's priorities. And he also set the highest standards in terms of the threshold for his resignation.
Welcome back. The Justice Secretary and Deputy Prime Minister has gone, but he's gone not willingly. In an unrepentant resignation letter today, Mr. Raab said he wanted to keep his word that he would stand down if the report found against him, but he claims the process was flawed and that it sets a dangerous precedent. We will discuss that further tonight with our panel, the global trade expert Rebecca Harding, and from California, the Republican Lenny Chen, who was policy director for Mitt Romney's presidential campaign. And we could hardly have a better panel for our deep dive tonight into the profound changes we are seeing in world trade. There is a new global map that has emerged since February last year on which countries are dividing into two distinctive trading blocs. What does that mean for you and me? Also tonight, we're keeping our eye on that US Supreme Court decision, a ruling expected in the coming hours on the abortion drug mifepristone after a court in Texas suspended the license 2 weeks ago. This could be the most consequential ruling the court has taken since it ended the nationwide right to abortion last year. But let's return first to Dominic Raab's resignation. A few hours ago, he sat down with the BBC's political editor, Chris Mason. So Lenny Chen and Rebecca Harding are with us. Rebecca, let me start with you. There are other MPs today who've echoed Dominic Raab's complaint that the threshold for what counts as bullying has been set too low. Do you see that in the private sector? Has it changed? Well, we did try and get the Conservatives on to talk about this tonight, but not many of them want to come on and discuss it. We'll see what sort of commentary there is tomorrow in the morning papers. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Let's take a quick look at some of the other stories making headlines today. The United Nations has warned that saving the world's glaciers is in effect a lost cause. In its annual report on climate change, the World Meteorological Organization found that glaciers melted at an alarming speed last year, describing their loss in Europe as off the charts. The report said the effects were obvious, from extensive flooding in Pakistan to extreme heat waves across Europe and China, with catastrophic drought in Somalia. Leaders of the UK's biggest union for the communications industry, that is the Communication Workers Union, have accepted a Royal Mail pay offer, which includes a 10% salary increase and a one-off lump sum of £500. Union members will vote on the deal in the coming weeks, which could bring to an end the dispute over jobs and conditions, which led to a series of walkouts, you might remember, last year. Picture of the late Queen surrounded by some of her grandchildren and great-grandchildren at Balmoral Castle has been released on what would have been her 97th birthday. This particular picture was taken several months before she passed away in September last year. The coronation of King Charles III is set for the 6th of May. You're live with BBC News. You may have noticed in recent programmes we've been trying to go a bit deeper into stories as we try and make sense of the world that's changing around us. And tonight we're going to talk trade. The global economy has been undergoing a period of transformative change. First the pandemic, the Ukraine war, the weaponisation of energy, the resulting inflation, the rivalry between the United States and China. These are huge events that have moved the tectonic plates of geopolitics faster than at any time since the Cold War. The old order is gone. And what we see in its place is a world that is splitting ever more perceptibly into two competing blocks, with far-reaching implications for policy making at every level. It's a theme that Christine Lagarde, the president of the ECB, picked up at the Council of Foreign Relations earlier this week. Rebecca Harding, I want to anchor this discussion, if we can, on what it means for our viewers and the businesses that they might work in. So let's start with the issue that affects us all, and that is inflation. Do you think that the forces pushing up our cost of living are down to this fragmentation of our trading system? Yeah, well, it's certainly a trend that's happening. We see clues of it everywhere, and it is going to be one to watch in the coming years. Now, it's being reported that before the 2020 presidential election, Joe Biden's presidential campaign had reached out to the former acting CIA director, Mike Morell, to help them with a problem. The New York Post had just published an email from a laptop that belonged to Hunter Biden that suggested he'd introduced his Ukrainian business partner to his father and then Vice President Joe Biden. Soon after that story ran, the campaign official, now Secretary of State Antony Blinken, emailed Morell an article that claimed the FBI was investigating the story as part of a Russian disinformation campaign. But Morell has now given evidence to the House Judiciary Committee that until that contact, he had no intention of writing any statement exonerating Joe Biden. Blinken's communication, he said, had triggered that intent in him. Over the next 2 days, he gathered signatures for an open letter from 51 former intelligence officials, including 4 former CIA directors. The letter sent to the Washington Post said the allegations had all the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation. Let's bring in Anthony Zerka, who's in Washington. How important was that letter in the run-up to the vote, Anthony?
Whether to bring charges against Hunter Biden or not.
Anthony Zerka in Washington, thank you very much indeed. We're going to go to a short break. Have you lost your blue tick? We might discuss that after the break.
Be ready. Change can happen in an instant. Check on the BBC Weather app.
Hello, I'm Christian Fraser. You're watching The Context on BBC News. The bye-bye blues. The tick is removed, sending social media into meltdown. But what does it mean for the future of Twitter and our trust in it? Yes, for many of you, the blue bird has flown the nest. Well, for the blue tick, anyway. If you are a Twitter user, then you might have had one of those ticks on your account to authenticate who you are, but now they come at a cost. And yesterday, by virtual tweezer, many of the ticks were being removed. The Pope, Beyonce, J.K. Rowling, Cristiano Ronaldo, among the many high-profile users who've been hit. The cost for the annual subscription, at least through Android, is £11 a month, £11. But some are getting it free. LeBron James, William Shatner, the author Stephen King. Not that Stephen King knew about it. My Twitter account, he says I've subscribed to Twitter Blue. I haven't. My Twitter account says I've given a phone number. I haven't. To which Elon Musk responded, "You're welcome. Namaste." There is, though, a serious side to all this. No longer will you have that certainty that the person you follow is who they say they are. And there are fears that that will lead to the spread of misinformation among Twitter's more than 300 million monthly users. Rebecca, what do you make of it? It's a bold gambit by Elon Musk, but I suppose people might see some benefit in Twitter Blue. And yeah, well, the share price has plunged. He certainly needs the money, and he's already talked about how much he's lost, so we'll see what sort of effect it has. Let's talk about the US Supreme Court, which is poised to make an important decision this evening, vitally important. It will determine whether a widely used abortion drug can remain on the shelves. Mifepristone is now the most common method of ending a pregnancy in the United States, accounting for more than half of all abortions in the country. But earlier this month, a Texas federal judge suspended the Food and Drug Administration's approval of the pill, which was granted 2 decades ago. The case was brought by groups representing doctors who were opposed to abortion, who claimed the FDA had fast-tracked the licensing process and did not adequately consider the safety risks. The Supreme Court issued a stay on that Texas ruling, but only temporarily. A decision on what to do next must be made by midnight tonight Eastern Time. Joining us now to discuss is the Democratic Congressman Pat Ryan, who reintroduced legislation last week to protect access to the abortion drug. Congressman, you're very welcome to the programme. Thank you for being with us. Before we talk about your bill, which is crucially important, can we talk about the decision that the court has to make? What are the options before it? As the Congressman says, it could have a very chilling effect on drug development. Congressman Pat Ryan, thank you so much for coming on the programme. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're watching BBC News.
He's the oldest competitor running in this year's London Marathon. At age 90, David Pixley will walk the race rather than run. He's hoping to do it in 7 hours. The 90-year-old has run 13 marathons in his lifetime.
That was my last one, yes. I was struggling then. It took me about an hour longer to do that. It was 5 hours and something. So that was when I was 64, and I said, well, now is the time to give up marathon. So that was my last.
David will be running the race in honour of his sister, who died of bowel cancer 50 years ago. And he uses flyers to get donations.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's very kind.
And that was one member of the public that had just donated.
She took this, and at 8 o'clock in the morning, I looked at her and she'd paid her, give her a donation. It was absolutely wonderful.
And for David, he hopes to continue raising money as long as he can.
Now, it's time for the panel. Who has found a real-life case of Benjamin Button. Is that right? Caramelised onions?
I mean, that's sacrilegious. I don't understand why one would do that.
No. My son is an instant turn-off. That would be an instant turn-off. I can't get him to eat any onions, never mind caramelised onions. Oh, well, we'll see what happens with that. We're out of time. Lenny Chan, Rebecca Harding, thank you very much for your time this evening and your company. We will be back same time, of course, on Monday. Do join us for that. Good night.
Hi there, good evening. We start tonight with a stunning scoreline at Arsenal, who were hoping to extend their lead at the top of the Premier League, but